Hey, did you know that there's a link between hidden environmental toxins and hormone imbalances in your body? Dr. Peter Kozlowski's new book talks about that connection, and I'm so glad to have him on my show to discuss the most common environmental toxins and how to get rid of them, plus the connection with hormones and how to reduce your toxic burden that can help your hormones, including your thyroid and sex hormones as well, so you can live a long and healthy life. Stay tuned for a really cool episode. Are you enjoying the shows on this channel? If you are, please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal with this channel is to give you practical tips that will help you slow down your aging and look and feel younger and sexier for much longer. So hit the subscribe button down below and let's get on with the show. Are you looking to get thicker, fuller, and longer hair? Then make sure to check out fullyvital.com. We've come up with multiple products that stimulate hair follicles in different ways to wake them up and start the regrowth process, but also to get you thicker and fuller hair quickly. So make sure to check out fullyvital.com for natural hair healthy products and use code anti-aging hacks for 15% off your order. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Peter Kozlowski, who uses a broad array of tools to find the source of the body's dysfunction. He takes the time to listen to his patients and plots their history on a timeline, considering what makes them unique and co-creating with them a truly individualized care plan. Currently, he works with patients in person via his Chicago, Illinois office. Dr. Kozlowski did his residency in family practice, but started training in functional medicine as an intern. He trained in the clinics with leaders in his field, including Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Deepak Chopra, and Dr. Susan Blum. His latest book is called Get the Funk Out, which is a functional medicine guide to balance your hormones and detox. With that said, Dr. Kozlowski, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Okay, you are based in Chicago, and do you do online as well or just in person right now?
Virtual as well. It's
virtual
probably over still half of virtual, but
okay.
In person or virtual, yeah.
Okay, great. So let's talk. I've been reading your book. Fascinating. Lots of details about toxins and their relation to hormones. You also had previously written a book with the gut and toxin relation, I believe. And so what I want you to do, if you would, for the listeners, just get started and tell us how you got into the field and what you do, how you ended up doing what you do now.
Yeah, so it was just total random luck. If you would have told me I'd be a functional medicine doctor when I was in medical school or when I was in residency, when I started, I would have laughed in your face. It was just being at the right place at the right time. And I think more important than anything was just being willing. And so pretty much every like MD that ends up in functional medicine, it's because they got sick and they tried what they learned in traditional training and they didn't get better. So then they start looking for alternatives and they find functional medicine. That's my story, sort of. My disease was not a physical one, but a mental one. So I'm in recovery from alcohol abuse. And that's also something, if you would ask me that I ever dreamed I'd say no way. But for me, my general story is I'm a first generation American. My parents are from Poland. I was born in America. I grew up in a very American neighborhood and never really felt like I fit in. I was always very insecure. I'd go over to my friends' houses and they'd be having pizza night and burger night. And my parents would be like cooking weird Polish food and speaking Polish. And it was just very awkward. And then at a very young age, I was introduced to alcohol as a teenager, and that made all my problems go away. The insecurity was gone. Just the feelings I had were gone. So it was a very good tool for me to use. I used that tool all through high school, college, medical school. And when I got into residency, I tried to cut alcohol out of my life and just didn't know how to deal with life, didn't know how to deal with the day-to-day stresses without a coping mechanism. And so as an intern, I was really struggling, and I took a 6-week medical leave to go to a treatment program to get help. And never really thought I had an issue because I was successful. Everything was going well. I always imagined like somebody with an alcohol problem, somebody that was under the bridge and down and out. And for me, it was the opposite. I was hitting every goal I ever dreamed of. So I was like, how could this be me? But it was, and it is. And so during treatment, the craziest part was that I went to a place that was just professional. So there's all these like very successful people. And I was like, what are you guys doing here? And you guys don't have problems. But the whole point of it was all about why. And that's where I really dug into that. The reason I liked alcohol was because it helped me deal with my perfectionism, my insecurities, all of these things. So it was really a solution to the main underlying problem, which was me. So I went through that treatment, learned it had nothing to do with alcohol, and it was all about the why. And then when I went back to residency, and with a much different mindset towards life, because when I started treatment, I was your typical egotistical know-it-all doctor that you couldn't tell me anything, just give me a prescription pad and I'll fix you. And so went back to residency, and we had this doctor, his name's Dr. Batra, who every time a patient was admitted to the hospital, we as interns would have to write all the orders and get them all settled into their hospital care. But he would always have us start a multivitamin and vitamin D. And he was the only doctor that did this. And when you're a resident, you're taught by lots of different doctors. Sometimes you're working with a different attending every day, every week. So everybody has their own style of care. And we hated working with this guy because it was like, why are you wasting our time having us give people vitamins and vitamin D and multivitamins? This is stupid. And so it was like a running joke. And one day I was on call with him, and it was the middle of the night. It was like 2:00 on a Sunday morning. And I asked him, I was like, Dr. Batra, like, why do you make us do this? Like, why are you different? Why are you weird? And he's like, well, I'm studying functional medicine. And I was like, what is that? And he took me to their website, and he said, it's all about the root cause. And having come through what I just went through with my own personal life, I was like, wow, that seems like it makes a lot of sense. And as a resident, you're required to go to conferences, and I didn't know what kind of continuing medical education I wanted to do. And I was like, you know what, they're paying for it. Screw it. I'll go check out this functional medicine conference. So I went to AFMCP, which is like the first general conference that kind of puts it all together. And within the first hour of being there, I knew my career could never be the same. Everything was taught from a physiology, a biochemistry, anatomy level. Everything just made sense. It's just nothing. It had nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. And I was so confused, like why nobody had been teaching me this stuff prior. So and then the even what struck me more is that I was the youngest person there in my career. So I was still an intern in residency, where I was like with all these like experienced surgeons and dermatologists and nurses and acupuncturists and chiropractors, all these people that I just wouldn't expect to be there. And everybody was telling me, like, if you're just starting your career, this is what you should do. This is what you should do. So I pursued it, and I kind of just took a risk, and I was like, I'm going to follow this. And so I went all in, and every opportunity I had to go to a conference and keep training, I did. I was very aggressive in like talking to people at these conferences, and that's how I met Dr. Hyman and Dr. Blum and some staff at Dr. Chopra's clinic. And while I was there, I was like, listen, I'm a resident. Can I come shadow you guys and learn from you? And I was very lucky. My residency program was extremely supportive, and they were like, you know, I got to go leave my residency program and go train at these awesome clinics. And I would follow everybody. I would follow the receptionists. I would follow the nutritionists. I would follow the cleaning staff. I would follow the doctors, just seeing how it all functioned and how it actually applied. So, and that was it. And I finished residency, and I started my own functional medicine practice. That was in 2014. And I've been in solo practice since. And it's taken me to places I would have never dreamed of.
Totally. That's a cool story. And I'm glad you also started with your insecurities and how you felt different, and made that full circle into how you got into the new field, functional medicine, as opposed to what you were trained for and presumably spent a lot of time and money on with your medical training. Okay, so let's talk about in your book, which I've been reading, you say that, or your philosophy is that there's usually a multitude or many things that lead to the manifestation of a disease or symptoms, and it's just not one thing. How did you come to believe that?
I think through just seeing a lot of patients over the years. And as a traditional doctor and in traditional medicine, it seems like we're very focused on finding like the one root cause for something, right? Like the diabetes is because of this, or high blood pressure is because of this, or autoimmune diseases, traditional medicine has just given up on. They're just like, we don't know, this just happens. So, it is.
Yeah.
But it's just never been that easy, right? And so in regards to, there's 5 main areas we look at in functional medicine for root cause of disease. And the first one is the first one is food. The second one is gut health. The third is hormones. The fourth is toxins. And the fifth is mental, emotional, spiritual health. But those things aren't independent of each other. They're all connected, right? And so if you have a toxic burden, that's going to damage your gut. If your diet sucks, that's going to damage your gut, which is going to cause you to absorb more toxins. If you're living under that sympathetic nervous response and you've experienced trauma or you're under chronic stress, that's going to shut down your gut. That's going to shut down your hormones. That's going to stop your ability to detox. And then if you're not detoxing, then you get more toxins in, and then your hormones get damaged. So it's just not been my experience that like, okay, I'll find a buildup of heavy metals and that's the answer to everything. Or I find dysbiosis and that's the answer, candida or SIBO, or just a dairy sensitivity. Usually there's more than one thing contributing. And I can't think of anyone that I've worked with where it was just one thing and that fixed everything. It's the analogy that I really like is that we're all born with a bucket. And we fill that bucket with all these different things. And eventually that bucket overflows into disease. And for some of us, we're born with a bucket that's really huge, right? And we can do all types of bad behaviors and not take care of ourselves and we don't get sick. But then, I'll work with a family who has an autistic child and their bucket overflowed at 2 years old. So it is very much my belief through just seeing lots of patients, doing so many tests over the years that for most of us or all of us, it is really multifactorial.
That makes sense when you think about the everyday lives of people and how we're interacting with the new world we've created. We're separated from nature. We're eating foods. We have no idea where they came from, what country they came from, or formed in, and just all of the EMFs and the other things that are in the environment that are not helping us by any means, the water, food. Now, the book that you wrote talked about toxins and their relation to hormones. Let me ask you first, what are the most common toxins that you see or people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives in America and in the West? And I think one of the really good examples you shared in your book was your wife going through her day, just coming across all these toxins. So I'd love for you to share that story as you talk about toxins.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to even begin? I think just starting with the story that I shared in the introduction of my book, we're under a constant onslaught of all these different things that we've introduced to our environment, right? And so the example I go through with my book is my wife's routine, and it starts with just going to bed, right? And so she goes to bed, but the Wi-Fi router's on the other side of our bed, right? And so then there's EMFs coming in. So those are going all night long. And then we had water damage in our house. So there's mold in our house. So she's breathing in mycotoxins all night. And then she wakes up, she goes downstairs, makes a smoothie for breakfast. And she's using a protein powder that has toxins in it. She's using fruits and vegetables that have high levels of toxins in them. She goes outside to play with our dogs, and the dog's toys are made of plastic. She's touching that. She sits down on the couch, which is sprayed with flame retardants, and she's breathing those in. Then she goes upstairs to shower, and the hot shower water is releasing a bunch of chlorine and fluoride and all these different other chemicals. Then she finishes, and then she tries straightening her hair, and she's using a hair straightening product. She starts applying all her different mascara and cover up and makeups and all these different things. And all of this stuff is just an onslaught, right? And so we have 3 barriers to protect us from all these toxins in our environment, right? And it's our skin, it's our lungs, and it's our gut. And these are our first detox organs. And most people think of their liver as their main detox organ, but really it starts with the barrier of just our body is trying to keep this stuff out. But what's happened is that over the last really 50 years, maybe a little bit longer, we've just increased this toxic burden on our environment. And another example I give in my book is the use of glyphosate, which is the main component of Roundup. Mm-hmm. And we're spraying this on everything, but then you're trying to eat organic, but the farms that are organic are next door to farms that are spraying glyphosate, and they're finding that in their soil. You go outside and you breathe, and there's lead in the air from the airplane exhaust. And it's just, our bodies aren't equipped to deal with everything that we're dealing with. We all have a limited ability to detox, right? And so if these toxins cross through our skin, our lungs, our gut, the first place that they go is our liver, and that's your detox organ. And I think one of the most important things to understand about toxins is that they're fat soluble. So that means if they do cross through our barriers, they will get absorbed into our fat. Well, where is fat in your body? Every cell in your body is surrounded by a membrane which has fat in it. Some of the fattiest cells are your brain cells, right? Your nervous system. So unless our liver, so if those toxins cross, our body sends them to the liver, which is your main detox organ. And your liver goes through something called phase 1 and phase 2, which is a 2-step process to break those toxins down to make them water soluble. When they're water soluble, we pee, poop, and sweat them out. That's how we get rid of toxins. And if we don't do that, or if our ability is overwhelmed, so let's say my liver can detox 100 things at a time, but I'm living in a moldy house and I'm exposed to 5,000 toxins at a time, my liver can only handle 100, 4,900 don't get broken down. So then they're just floating around and looking for fat to get stored in. Well, every cell in your body has fat around it, except for your red blood cells. So these toxins can get stored in your bones, in your skin, in your eyes, in your hair, in your brain, in your knees, in your toes, your liver, your kidneys, anywhere. So that's just I know that's a lot of information at once, and I promise all of it is explained in my book, and you can go through it slowly. But these toxins, so if they start building up, they're not supposed to be there, right? And they can start inflaming cells. And the big thing that happens is that, I mean, toxins cause all types of damage, damaging DNA, damaging the cell nucleus. But one of the worst things they do is damage our mitochondria. And everybody kind of knows the mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cells. So a cell, whether we're talking about a cell in your thyroid gland or in your testes or in your adrenals or in your muscle, it needs those mitochondria inside of it to make energy so it could do its job. Well, the number one thing that toxins do is damage mitochondria. So then if you picture, for example, like the number one autoimmune disease is thyroid disease, right? And the book is mostly focused on hormones in the beginning, Hashimoto's disease. And that's the number one condition from an autoimmune perspective, which is just your body is attacking the thyroid. Well, these cells are, you know, if we're focusing on the thyroid, the cells of the thyroid are surrounded by this membrane that's full of lead and mold and glyphosate and all this stuff, damages the mitochondrial function. The cells stop working, you stop making thyroid hormone, and next thing you're diagnosed with low thyroid or Hashimoto's, and you go to your doctor and they put you on a thyroid hormone, and you ask them, why did this happen? And they're like, we have no clue, it just does. My argument in the book and my argument from my experience of working with people for many years is that it's our toxic environment that's causing this. So in regards to answering your actual question of what are the most common toxins, by far and away, the number one toxin that I would test anybody for are heavy metals. And the two heavy metals that I find the most frequently are lead and mercury. I always say that I don't need to hear anything in your timeline, in your history, that tells me that I should test you for heavy metals. Just being alive in 2023 is a risk to test heavy metals. One story that I always go back to is I worked with a couple. They were both in their 60s, and she was born in Chicago and he was born in Nigeria. And they were relatively healthy. She had some health issues we were working on. He kind of just accompanied her to visits. And we wanted to do the heavy metal testing, and they both decided to test. And the three of us talking, we were like, well, we all expect that the husband was going to test higher because he grew up in Nigeria where they don't have like an environmental protection agency, the EPA. So he's going to be the one with lots of heavy metals, and her growing up in Chicago, she was going to be fine. And we got the results back. It was the opposite. She was through the roof from growing up in Chicago.
Wow.
And he was zero, basically. He had no heavy metals in his body. And that's just one example. And I could go through so many of them of where there's nothing in one's history that would suggest like, oh, you have a bunch of lead in your body. But we do, because, for example, lead, like I said, is an airplane exhaust. I mean, I can look out the window and see airplanes flying by. They used to make pipes out of lead. So if you live in an older city, a lot of the pipes might be lead. They used to put lead in paint. It's in our food. Mercury is in the fumes from coal burning plants that settles in our oceans. So one of the greatest exposure risks for mercury is eating fish, but it's also in fruits and vegetables because it settles in the soil. So that's number one. And I think over the last year, a new one has moved into number 2 in my rankings, and that is glyphosate, which I mentioned before, which is the main component of Roundup. So the largest lawsuit in the history of America was settled a couple of years ago. Many people listening to this have probably heard of the company called Monsanto. Monsanto is the company that makes Roundup. And they paid $10 billion to 80,000 people who had health. Most of it was focused on cancer. But the lawsuit actually reads like health issues from being exposed to glyphosate. And that one, there was a national news article a couple months ago that they said they found glyphosate in 80% of urine samples. In my practice, it's over 95%. And the scariest thing is that my patient population is not your typical like American off the street. Like my patients that come to me, most of them have already been eating organic for years, and most of them are extremely health conscious. These are not people that should be testing positive for glyphosate. If you just thought like, well, the best thing I could do to avoid it is to eat organic and I'm not going to get it. But that's the hard part, that it's everywhere. And
what do people do? So you talked about lead and mercury, and you said that I don't need their history. It's everywhere. And so most people have exposure to these, toxic heavy metals and also now glyphosate. So and we're not even talking about all the other toxins. What are normal people supposed to do? How do they get away from some of these toxic metals and or glyphosate that seem to be so prevalent right now?
You can't. You really can't, unfortunately. Just one example from my own home is we moved into a new home in January. And I just didn't really know what to do with our yard, and we had some weeds growing, and I was like, I don't want to spray anything. And we have well water at our house, and so we're drinking. Whatever we're putting into our soil is getting into our drinking water. And I was like, well, I'm not going to spray. I'd rather have some weeds for now. I'm going to use some vinegar. And I look at my neighbors on both sides are walking around spraying Roundup all over the place. And I was like, well, I'm screwed. So what did I do? I got a really nice reverse osmosis filter for my drinking water, right? Yeah. So that's something I did. The exposure, another thing I did is in 2020, I got out of Chicago and I moved to Montana for 3 years, and I lived in the mountains. And so I do think my exposure was less there, but it makes it hard to have a business and do other things living in the middle of nowhere.
Totally.
So the best things that I think you can do, the best thing I think you can do is test. So we can test your levels of heavy metals, and we could test your levels of glyphosate, and we could test other toxins. But if you don't have access to testing, there's 3 things that we can all do every day, right? And number one is pee, right? One of there's 3 ways we're detoxing. We're getting rid of this stuff: pee, poop, and sweat. So number one is drink half your body weight in ounces in water. If you're peeing, you're flushing them out, right? Number 2 is poop. Move your bowels, right? If you're not moving your bowels every day, you're not ready to detox. One of my colleagues, Terry Walls, she has an amazing story. She used functional medicine. She was wheelchair bound from MS, and through functional medicine, she's all over speaking at conferences all over the world now. She says you should poop a snake every day.
So a snake.
Yeah. That means things are really flowing.
Wow.
And so moving your bowels every day, that's huge. And that gets into really my first book about gut health. If you are listening to this and you're not moving your bowels every day, or you're having gut issues, the first step in detox is to unfunk your gut. You got to get your gut right before you can get the detox right. And the third one is sweat. And that's through exercise, or that's through the use of sauna. Infrared sauna is my preferred sauna for detox, but there's so many, exercise is amazing for mental health, right? It's amazing for your muscles and your bones. It's the best way as a man to keep your testosterone up. It's the best way as a man or woman to prevent osteoporosis, keep your blood pressure down, prevent metabolic syndrome, but also detox. So, and then let me throw a fourth one in there, and that's get a good night's sleep, right? Because from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, your body's under an onslaught and of all this toxic burden. So you're at night is when your immune system restores. It's when your immune system develops memory. It's when your liver really gets rolling to get ready to detox. So if you could do those 4 things, and those 4 things more or less are free, right? You can for the most part, or at least part of a routine. So biggest piece of advice is to do testing. I think one of the worst things you could do is listen to this and just assume that you have glyphosate and lead and mold and all this stuff in your body. Don't assume that. Test first, because I've been shocked many times. I always say I'm lucky in my career that I don't have to guess. I really work objectively, so I really rely on testing to instead of guessing. But if you don't have access to testing, do the basics of sleep, pee, poop, and sweat.
Yeah, great. Those are great tips. Now, for people that are listening that are interested in testing, I think there's confusion that many people have about what types of tests to do for different types of toxin loads. So for the 3 that you mentioned, the lead, the mercury, and then the glyphosate, what are some common tests, and where can people get them?
Don't go to your regular doctor and say, I have a toxic burden from glyphosate or lead or mercury. They're not going to know what to do with that, and they're probably going to kick you out, right? So step 1 is finding someone. I always recommend, since I'm certified with the Institute of Functional Medicine, that's where I got my training, go to ifm.org and search for a practitioner. There's a tab right at the top of their page that says search for a practitioner. You can narrow down your search to certified practitioners. I would highly recommend doing that because unfortunately, functional medicine, there's a lot of people that want to do it, that are trying to do it, but don't really get it. So you want to go with somebody that's passed like the board exams for certification. And then secondly is reach out to their clinic and make sure they're comfortable with detox, because even a lot of people within functional medicine don't really know what they're doing with detox. So make sure that that's something that's in their wheelhouse. The best way to test toxins for the most part is in your urine. And that's because I mentioned that that's how we get rid of them, right? Is we are peeing them out. In my opinion, the only test that is worthwhile for heavy metals is called pre and post chelation testing. And that is, it can be a little complicated. So I go through it again very thoroughly in the heavy metal chapter of my book. But what we use is a medication that it comes from a compounding pharmacy. It's called DMSA. For the most part, there's a couple other ones called DMPS, EDTA, but I usually use DMSA. That is a medicine that actually pulls toxins out of your cells, right? And so what we do is give you this medicine based on your weight. And what you do is you get this big orange jug and you collect urine for 6 hours after taking this medication. And what's happening is that medicine is pulling what's stored in your body out, and we're catching it in this jug. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, you do what's called the pre-test, which is just the first morning urine sample. And what that first morning urine sample tells you is your active exposure. Because when you talk about detox, whatever toxin we're talking about, the only step that really matters in detox is to stop exposure. And so through a pre-test, you can measure your active exposure. Is there something in your water, in your air, in your home, in your diet that's too high in toxins? And we need to identify that. A really kind of scary example that I saw a few times when I was working with Dr. Susan Blum in New York is people eating sushi 3 times a week or more were peeing out a ton of mercury. And that's active exposure.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. But a lot of people don't think about it. Mm-hmm. So we always compare your pre-test to your post-test. The two should look identical. When you take this chelating medicine that pulls toxins out, there should not be any toxins stored in your body to pull out. If this medication pulls toxins out, that means they're sitting in your body. I can't tell you exactly where they're sitting, but through the mechanism that we know that every cell in your body is surrounded by fat, there's a chance that these toxins are in every cell in your body. So that, for me, is the second most popular test, and maybe even more common that doctors are offering patients, is hair testing for heavy metals. I even did that when I first started practicing. Hair testing is a total waste of time. Your hair grows so quickly that it's really just kind of a marker of the last couple weeks or months. And your hair testing is also very dependent on what are you putting in your hair, where are you walking around, what's settling in your hair, if you're working or you're living too close to like factories or things like that can affect your hair. So I really advise against hair testing. The only testing that I do with my patients is pre and post chelation testing.
Okay. And then what's the detox process look like? Is it long and drawn out? Like, I get the test, but is the process, let's say you identify in the chelation test that you do have quite a bit of toxin load. What does that detoxification process look like, and how long does it take? And does it work for most people?
It is the only thing that I do that's 100% effective.
Okay.
So it works for everybody.
Great.
If you follow the plan, right? Mm-hmm. Because what I use to detox people is chelation therapy for the most part. That's the tool that's 100% effective, and that's the use of that medication to pull those toxins out. That medicine does its job. You don't have to do anything special. You just have to remember what to take on what days. Mm-hmm. So it is 100% effective. I've never seen anyone go through chelation that it didn't work if they followed the plan. So that's the nice news, is that it does work. How long does it take? It depends on how bad your levels are. For me, after chelation, my lead level was 11, which is not that high, but it's, argument what's normal, right? That's one of the arguments by traditional doctors is what's a normal level. My argument is that normal is 0. Like there shouldn't be any of this in our body. So really, arguably anything above 0 is problematic. But usually for me, like 10 is my cutoff where I really start doing chelation. So for a lead level of 11 post chelation, it took me 7 months to get it. Okay. The worst levels I've ever seen. So my lead level again was 11. I think that contributed to my low testosterone. I had a patient who was a mechanic at O'Hare Airport. And I said that lead is an airplane exhaust. His level was 140. Wow. When you see a test result, the level of 11 shows up as through the roof. It goes through the red. Like it says that's in the 90th percentile, 99th percentile. I had this guy that was 140. I think it'll take him 5-7 years to get it out. So we're all very different, and I can never promise anyone how long it's going to take, but what I always do is follow-up testing. So based on your levels, I'll tell you, and that's through my clinical experience, is like I'll look at a level and I'll say, well, I think this will take 4 months. I think this will take 7 months. I think this will take a year. But at any point, we could always retest, I mean, for progress. So don't go running to your doctor and asking for DMSA, a chelating medicine. It's not totally safe. If you don't do it properly, it can be dangerous. The biggest side effect of using something like DMSA is that it doesn't just pull heavy metals out, it also pulls vitamins and minerals out. So I'm very aware of that when I put someone on a detox. And so what I do is load people up for a month with nutrients, with detox support. I deplete them for 4 days, and then I replenish them for 10 days. So we are very cognizant around the fact that DMSA is not totally safe. And that's, in my book, I went back and tried to understand why regular doctors don't do it. And another one of their arguments, it's funny, from like one of these professional institutions that's like the Academy of Toxicology or something, they say straight up DMSA and chelating medicines are amazing. They work fantastically. But they're not safe if not used properly. So I completely agree with that. And luckily, through my training, I was taught a detox protocol that I've used for over 10 years and never had a problem with it. So there's IV chelation. So there's clinics where you can go and actually get IVs. I had one patient that was getting a rectal chelating medicine. So there's all types of stuff out there. I traditionally just use oral chelation, but we're very strict about how we do it. But the length depends on how high your levels are, and what else do you have in your body, right? And so if you have a ton of glyphosate, if you have a ton of mold, if you're drinking a ton of alcohol, if you're smoking cigarettes, that's going to make it more difficult. So it really is very, very individualized. So I'm trying to put a generic number on it, but it's different for all of us. But I would say generically anywhere from 6 months to a year or longer to get lead or mercury out.
Got it. So the first step is test, and then once you know what your results are, then work with a qualified professional who can help you chelate these out of your body, get them out of your body, and recognize that it's going to take a little bit of time. This is not like a 2-week process or a 1-day process. It's going to take a little bit of time for you to get rid of it. And then step 4 would be really be careful about the environment you're in and your exposure to these chemicals or, heavy metals moving forward. Let's talk about some of the hormonal impacts that these toxins are having. You mentioned thyroid just a few minutes ago. I want to come back to that. There's a lot of hypothyroidism that or at least I don't want to say a lot, but we're seeing increased levels of hypothyroidism. And it seems to be that women seem to experience more than men. And also some experts say that 90% or more of all thyroid conditions are Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition, which you also brought up. And so at the end of the day, it looks like it's an autoimmune condition. But what are the toxicity and toxin load relations to the thyroid gland itself? And how is this playing a part in Hashimoto's, for example?
Yeah, great question. And everything you stated is very true. Hashimoto's is very common. It is more common in women. And again, I got lucky because one of my mentors is Dr. Susan Blum. And I think that her first book that she wrote many years ago about her own, so she's a Hashimoto's patient. And same story, like I said, most functional medicine doctors have their own health story why they're in this. So for her, it was Hashimoto's, and she learned functional medicine and was able to dramatically reduce the amount of thyroid medication she needed through functional medicine. And she taught me from day one, think of the thyroid as a sponge for toxins. And I didn't really get what that meant. And so I can't tell you exactly why, but one of the favorite places that toxins like to store is in your hormone glands. And so if we just think, and I like to keep everything very simple and visualize things, what is an autoimmune disease? Your immune system's job is to identify what's good and what's bad. right? And so it identifies your thyroid as being good or normal. It identifies glyphosate as being a problem. Your thyroid identifies your liver cells as normal, but then it sees genetically modified gluten or hybridized gluten or genetically modified soy or corn, and that's an invader, so it'll attack. So its job is literally to discriminate between what's yourself and what's an invader, right?
Right.
What an autoimmune disease is they say your immune system's gone crazy and it starts attacking your own tissue, right? So that's what Hashimoto's is it's your immune system has identified your thyroid cells as being invaders. So it's trying to get rid of them, right? Well, what if your thyroid cells are full of glyphosate, are full of mold, are full of lead, are full of mercury, right? And your immune system is like, wait a minute, these cells are problematic, right? There's these heavy metals in the cell membrane that are destroying the mitochondria. We need to just eliminate this. There's a battle going on here that is not appropriate. So we need to get rid of this. And that's at least the way I conceptualize it, right? Like I haven't seen a study that I could quote that they took a biopsy of thyroid tissue and they found all these toxins in it, and that's why the immune system's attacking. But to me, things have I just have to conceptualize things and make sense of things. So that, I could go with the traditional way that I was trained through family practice residency and just say, you have Hashimoto's, I have no clue why, here's some synthroid medicine and move on to the next patient. Right. Or I can try to think with my patients, like, why is Hashimoto's so much more common than it used to be? Well, if the cells of your thyroid are surrounded by fat, your body has a ton of toxins in it, maybe they're stored in that fat. And so maybe if we get rid of those toxins, your immune system will be like, hey, you know what, thyroid, you actually look pretty good now, right? And so I'm not going to try to get rid of you.
That'd be an interesting study of just taking a bunch of Hashimoto's patients and extracting cells from the thyroid gland and testing for heavy metals or toxins.
There's a really interesting study that I did just see that out of Australia, it was on plastic, right? And what they found is in the rain, there's huge levels of microplastics in the rain, right? So that's another way. Yeah, in the rainwater. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's where you say, how do we avoid this stuff? I'm more and more convinced you can't. I mean, you can do your best, right? You can drink clean water and eat clean food and grow your own food. There's lots of things you can do, but a lot of things are unavoidable. So literally, when you go out and it's raining, and I don't know, you think in America, like Seattle, it would rain all the time. But so they found all these microplastics in the rain, right? And they did actually biopsy people. And where they found, at least in men, the most microplastics was in their testes.
Wow.
Right? So then you look at an IVF clinic, a fertility clinic that, is just a revolving door of it's something that's not talked about, but infertility, it's insane how common it is, right? And then same deal, we're we don't know why, but luckily we've created meds and there's an artificial way to make babies now. The rates, there wasn't IVF clinics that were a revolving door 50 years ago. People used to get pregnant normally.
Yeah.
Well, if you go outside and it's raining and there's plastic in the rain and that's going straight to your testes, and then you wonder why a man's not making sperm the way he used to or testosterone the way he used to. I mean, so I would love, there's so many studies I would love to do. And I can't a lot of times. I'm a clinician. I see patients every day. And that's where, my focus is just helping people try to figure this stuff out and get better. But those are some examples, of why might Hashimoto's be happening. And that's the way I was taught of it is it's a sponge.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. In your book, you talked about a low-dose naltrexone that is being used or starting to be used to tamp down immune function. So yes, we do know that inflammaging, as people age, it becomes a chronic problem, or inflammation becomes a chronic problem. That's why it's called inflammaging, and it contributes to faster aging in humans. So it makes sense that we want to tone down the inflammatory response a little bit. But the question is, how much when you need a chronic, or you need acute, I should say, acute inflammatory response, you want to have that as strong as possible in case of an infection or a virus or whatever. But the chronic, I don't think there's, well, this is just me speculating, but I don't know that there's a lot of need for the chronic inflammation or the heightened sense of alert that our body experiences as we get older. So that's why low dose naltrexone is being used, because it tamps down some of that immune response, but also helps the thyroid gland in overall function as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, LDN is one of my favorite tools for Hashimoto's.
Okay. And is that something that you just take for a long time, and it's safe for long time use?
For me, it varies individual to individual. I don't like to keep anybody on anything too long. My goal is always to get you better, and then just rely on your diet, sleep, lifestyle, exercise, like whether it's like supplements, like a lot of people think you go to a functional medicine doctor, you're going to get put on 10 supplements, 20 supplements. 99% of the time I'm getting my patients off of supplements.
Wow.
Like people come to me, you know, with 10, 20 supplements that they're taking a day. And my initial reaction is like, well, if these were working, you probably wouldn't be spending the money on seeing me. So there's something not working here. But that, you know, there's different functional medicine people that take different approaches. But for me, I very much believe that, like, let's identify what's imbalanced. Let's get rid of it. And then our bodies are really good. Our bodies work very well when you just get out of the way, right? And sometimes we have to get out of the way mentally, but sometimes we got to get it out of the way with the stuff we're eating or the stuff that's sitting in our cells.
Yeah.
It just reminds me, like, a really, really important point that I want to make for anybody listening that hasn't really thought about toxins. The worst thing, arguably, about toxins, they don't cause symptoms, right? Like, it would be very easy if, like, you ate some spicy tuna rolls and it gave you a headache, or it gave you abdominal symptoms, or your rash got worse. Or if you poured yourself a glass of water and it was full of lead, and you tasted it and you're like, oh no, my headache's coming on. Or if when you showered and you're breathing in all those chemicals from the city water, it's like, well, now a rash starts while I'm in the shower. Like, this stuff is silent. It builds silently. And that's, to me, one of the worst things about toxicity and toxic burden is our accumulation starts before we're even born. So I quote a couple of studies where they found over 100 different toxins in umbilical cord blood, right? So if a woman comes to me for pregnancy planning, the first thing I'm doing is detox. I'm testing for toxins. And you know, the goal number one is, like, so your baby's not born with a bunch of this stuff. And then it just keeps going, our toxic load. But it doesn't cause symptoms. It doesn't cause pain when you eat it, drink it, smell it, touch it. What happens is you're breathing this stuff in, it's accumulating. All of a sudden, one day you're like, wow, I've been really tired for the last 3 months. And you go in and your doctor's like, oh, you have Hashimoto's. Or, you know, you have your parent who's in their 80s or 70s, and it's like, well, they're starting to lose their mind and they have dementia. And it's like, well, they have a lifetime accumulation of all these different toxic burdens. So that's where I really encourage testing. And that goes for the gut. You know, I know we're not going to have time probably to really hit on the gut, but things like dysbiosis and candida and even SIBO and things like that could silently be there, but you're not feeling symptoms from it. So my hope and goal for the world one day is that, like, a pediatric visit is not just going in and getting loaded up with vaccines. It is going in and getting a heavy metal test at the age of 3. It's testing your microbiome at your first birthday. Because I do all this testing, but most of the time it's when a child's 3, or an adult that's 45 or 60 or 70 or 30. And they're like, well, you know, I have all this lead in my body. When did it get here? I don't know. Through my testing, I can't tell you that it got there, you know, from your baby food or from, you know, the school that you went to. All I can tell you is whether it's coming in right now and whether it's built up in your body. But if our world changes eventually in functional medicine and it becomes more standard of care, well, we could look and, like, at your pediatric visit at 1, 2, 3, your microbiome was fine, but then something happened between 3 and 4, but at least we caught that, and that didn't simmer for 20 years and then turn into disease.
Yeah. What a good point. I think that I hope the standard of care changes, even with coming to practitioners like you and people having to pay out of pocket. It's sometimes challenging for ordinary people that, one, haven't heard and maybe don't even trust non-conventional medicine, for them to take the big leap. And then you got to also pay out of pocket many times for some of these tests, and certainly for the doctor fees. So it's just that the practice right now is not stacked for good health, it's stacked for symptoms, and here's a pharmaceutical or a drug, and off you go, and please stay on that for the rest of your life, making some of the big corporate interests very happy.
Exactly.
I want to ask, there's so much more I want to talk to you. We haven't even got through even half of my questions, but I think that maybe as something for people to take away, what are some of the top 3 to 5, if you could rank order a few things that people can do to drastically reduce their toxic load burden? For example, you mentioned using a reverse osmosis water filter. That's huge, because that gets rid of all the junk in the city water that you can't see and that's accumulating in your body. So I believe that's a great one. Maybe even the shower filter in your shower. What things can people do, in your opinion, that are like, they don't cost that much, but they have a big impact on reducing the toxic burden?
One is I would say the number one thing is get familiar with the website ewg.org. That's the Environmental Working Group. That is a nonprofit that has been around for a long time, and it every year is studying all the stuff in our environment. So you could go on ewg.org and type in your mascara or your deodorant or your hair product or your cleaning supplies, and it'll give you a toxicity rating, right? So you can start identifying, like, hey, the laundry detergent I'm using is not good, and it'll give you solutions on there of other detergents, right? And so that's a free resource, and a lot of that's in my book. My book's not free. I think it's $20 on Amazon, but the last chapter goes through a lot of that stuff of little simple things you can do to start cleaning up your environment. A lot of people have heard of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So the Dirty Dozen are the 12 fruits and vegetables every year that are found to be the highest in herbicides and pesticides and chemicals, right? Most people have heard of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. They don't know that that's actually the EWG that's putting that out. So the Environmental Working Group is the one that started that list, and they update it every year. So you can get familiar with that list. And so if you're trying to prioritize what should you buy organic, what should you not, well, get familiar with the Dirty Dozen and try to get those organic, right? And the Clean 15, get those non-organic, because that's going to save you some money.
Right.
Don't keep your cell phone against your body. That's one that I don't think I've talked about in a while, but like there's studies I saw a long time ago that were scientists combining from all over the world, looking at women who would carry their cell phone in their bra and breast cancer in their 20s, 30s.
Wow. Crazy.
If you go into like this privacy settings of your iPhone, it'll tell you, don't keep this within like a quarter inch of your body. The 2 worst places that you could actually have your cell phone close to you: elevator and taking off or landing in an airplane. Because of that rapid movement, the signals are like rapidly trying to catch a signal. So don't keep your body against your phone in the elevator or when you're on an airplane. So that's another one. Something crazy is start looking at the labels of the clothes that you're wearing. They're putting plastic into a lot of athletic clothing, right? So a lot of this like tight fit stuff. And that's your skin, like we said, is one of the way you absorb stuff. Well, if you're wearing like tight fitting underwear or exercise clothes that are full of plastic, those are getting absorbed right into your testes or right there to your ovaries. If you're shopping for food, don't eat anything that has 7 or more ingredients in it. I had to cook some Impossible meat not that long ago, this vegan meat that it had like 40 ingredients.
Totally.
Hard to believe. Like, I was like, what is this stuff? That's another one. And so, but if people read my first book on gut health or this one on detox, I arguably would say the best thing you can do is to make your mental, emotional, spiritual health the focus of your life. And our nervous system is either running in the sympathetic nervous response or the parasympathetic nervous response. Sympathetic is fight or flight. That's you're out hiking and you see a grizzly bear and all the blood flow goes to your brain and muscles to survive. It goes away from your liver and it goes away from your gut. Well, you need your gut to be healthy, to keep your microbiome healthy, to digest food. You need your liver to detox. One of the worst ways that we're getting in our own way is just constantly living in that fight or flight response. Don't watch the news while you're eating breakfast. They say that like at Deepak Chopra's clinic, like the best way to start your day is to wake up, pee, meditate, right? And start that awareness to the present moment. I think one of the worst things you could do for detox or for your gut is to really start going on rabbit holes online and where you can really convince yourself that there's no hope, that you can't do anything, that you can't drink water, you can't breathe air. Like that's also not going to help you. And that's where, for me, yes, eliminating toxins is a big deal, but I've seen so many people over the years that get hyper focused on it, that they are not barely eating anything. They're scared to leave their house. They're scared to do anything. That's not helpful either. I would rather have you out there in the air, taking a jog or going for a walk and not worrying about what you're exposed to, but getting that sweat going to help eliminate what you're exposed to.
I love that.
I think one of the best things you can do to detox is just to activate your parasympathetic nervous system and stay in the present moment.
Yeah, I love that so much. I've been going down this rabbit hole for the last couple of years and recognizing how important it is. There are studies. I had a psychologist on the show last week. There are studies that the mental trauma can even come from your generations, like your parents can pass down mental trauma to you. And once either if your parents pass it down, or even if you as a child, which all of us have had trauma of some kind, then some people are more susceptible to ongoing trauma moving forward. So your resilience, like you talk about the bucket, is already half full at that point, and it's filling even more with all the toxins. And so I love what you're saying is if you can find a way, and even in your book, you talk about therapies and ways that you can use to reduce the mental burden or the mental trauma that's ongoing in your life, with like EMDR or brain spotting or neurofeedback. There's so many ways. And of course, they're not all free, but you can find other techniques that might be cost effective for you. And you can just have a sense of normalcy and be relaxed about who you are and just the chances of you being in this planet to begin with, and how grateful you can be for so many things in your life, as opposed to like strung up about everything that's going on and hyper vigilant.
That's a preview to my first book on gut health. That's the argument I made in my gut health book, is that the key to your gut health is your mental, emotional, spiritual health, and on all the ways that the sympathetic nervous response will shut down your gut, and you will never be able to heal your gut if you don't get out of that fight or flight response. And if you don't ever heal your gut, you're never going to be able to detox. So again, it all goes back to me, to that mental, emotional, spiritual health. And that's really the key. That's how most disease starts, in my opinion. The best definition I heard of trauma is anything less than nurturing. So trauma, most people think of trauma as like war and violence and things like that. But trauma could be as simple as like me. They told me I had trauma, and I got really defensive. I was like, F you guys. Like my parents, they didn't really talk to me about emotions or feelings, but they immigrated from another country and worked their asses off to like give me another life. I don't have trauma, but they didn't really pay attention to me. I was being left alone from the time I was like 6 years old to like fend for myself, because they were both working all the time.
Wow.
And that was trauma. I never looked at my life as like experiencing trauma, but the reality is I did. And I think the worst kind of trauma that we go through is the trauma we put ourselves through.
Right.
You can you can look at someone who's been through something very violent or been to war and come back, and people will sympathize with them and be like, wow, you've been through a lot. But somebody like me, you're like, well, you had a pretty good life, but like mentally I didn't. And that makes it almost worse, because then you feel worse about having trauma. And it's like, you're looking at someone who had real stuff happen to them. And this is my own feelings, is like, wow, like you have something to work on. Me, I'm just like an asshole for like feeling this way, but the body doesn't differentiate that. My body still felt the effects of the stuff I made up in my head.
Right, totally. Awesome. We could keep going, Dr. Kozlowski, but we're running out of time. So what I want to do is I want to ask you about where people can get your book. The book is called Get the Funk Out. Tell us where people can get it. Also tell us about your website and how people can find you and work with you.
The most important way to find my book is to know how it's spelled, and it's Get the Funk Out with a C, the F-U-N-C. And that's from a saying that we used to say in my practice, or still sometimes say, is that we put the funk in functional medicine. So that's where the titles came from. So Get the Funk Out with a C. And it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, it's on Audible. Your local bookstore, if you want to support the local bookstore, they probably don't have it in stock, but if you go there and ask for it, they can order it. And it's available worldwide. You can get it whether you're in Australia or Europe or South America, they can all order it. So it's very easy to find if you know how to spell it. It's on my website, and then my website is doc-koz.com, doc-koz.com. I have an Instagram page and a Facebook page. It's doc_Koz, or if you just look up Peter Kozlowski, MD, it should pop right up. There's links there to get it. And yeah, my website, if anybody's interested in working with me or learning more, getting toxin testing, if you've read the book and you want to get the testing, just email us or call us through the website, and we can get that set up and we can get tests shipped wherever.
Fantastic. Yeah, I would highly encourage people to read the book. I got a lot out of it, and I'm going to go back and reread it or revisit some sections as I see fit. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Dr. Koz. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.